This is Carrie and Summer with the Say My Name podcast that gives a voice to women's stories. It's my story, it's your story, it's our stories of pain and healing.
Betrayal doesn't begin to describe the knife that I pull out of my side. So I'ma put the past behind me, 'cause I got strength inside me, and a strength that I wanna share with you.
Welcome to episode 4, Nancy's story. This woman has been through the most amazing and heart-wrenching journey of pain, abuse, and healing. I hope you are sitting down for this, because Nancy's story will change you forever.
Nancy, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome! I'm so excited.
I am too.
Let's start by just having you introduce yourself.
So I'm Nancy, and I'm a 49-year-old single mom with 2 grown children and 2 grandbabies.
Oh, how old are they?
So my one grandson's 3, and the other one is 1.
So what do you do for a living?
For 20-some years, I was a recruiter, like a corporate sales recruiter, and I still do some recruiting, but I just recently started doing fitness and lifestyle coaching. So kind of wanted to get into my own thing because I just had a whole transformation, and so I just felt like I just don't want to be in corporate America anymore.
Oh, completely agree.
So what kind of transformation?
I've always been really fit my whole life, and back in 2011, I filed for separation and divorce, and in 5 years, from December of 11 to like September of 16, I put on 50 pounds and was miserable for probably most of those 5 years. And I moved here from Chicago almost 2 years ago at 200 pounds. I was on a mission. I set my mind to it and decided to make some serious changes and lost 50 pounds in 10 months.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been fucking awesome. Yeah.
And you've kept it off this whole time.
Yeah, I've probably put on about 6 or 7. That's because this woman over here is training me to build my booty, and that's weight.
And your booty
Some
looks
good
good.
weight.
Oh, yeah.
By the way.
Little kadonk.
We know that you have a pretty significant story.
I
and
do.
It's very moving. We appreciate giving us the opportunity to share it with the world.
Well, thanks. And I'm excited to share it because I feel like, unlike some people, I've always been really open about it. Once I discovered that I wanted to talk about it and could, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to, but as I just went through life and was able to just talk openly about it, which actually probably started with a counselor back when I was in my 20s, it just felt healing. I don't know how else to put it, and that's a really mild word to use, to be able to talk about it. And I think that the more that what you ladies are doing, helping people to talk about it, even if they have to talk in a journal, write in a journal or talk out loud to themselves, it's extremely healing, and it helps you to get through it and not around it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So as early as I can remember, I was about 2 years old. I do actually remember being that young. My fraternal grandfather was sexually abusing me and my 2 sisters. Back then, I'm 49 years old now, so this was a long time ago. My sisters, I didn't really know at the time that they were being abused. It was mostly me. It was kind of an interesting situation. My family lived in Chicago, 3 siblings and myself, so a twin sister, older sister, and older brother, and my parents. And we would go to Cleveland, Ohio, where we're from, every Thanksgiving and I think every spring break. I mean, we went like once or twice a year. So we had my dad's parents, which is my fraternal grandfather and grandmother, and we had my mom's parents, and they lived in 2 different places, obviously, and I always stayed at my dad's parents. Weird as it is, I mean, back then I didn't think anything of it, and clearly my parents didn't, but my grandfather and grandmother did not sleep together in their bed. My grandma would sleep on the couch, I would sleep with my grandfather in his bed, and then they had like a hideaway bed. So my brother and my twin sister would take turns sleeping there too, and I don't even remember, honestly, if my brother and sister slept in there together, or they would, like, 1 or 2 of them would sleep at my other grandma's with my older sister. My older sister never slept at this particular grandparents. It was always like me for sure, and then either my brother and my twin sister. The way I remembered it was triggered by abuse later on in life as a young teenager with a man that I was dating at the time, which ended up being my son's dad. But my abuse from, I would say, 2 years old until about 7 years old, was all sexual abuse. Through the healing and talking to counselors is how I remembered everything, like, pretty vividly. And the only way I can explain it is that I didn't know this happened to me, but I never thought about it, like never consciously thought about it. So it was always in the back of my head. And I want to make it really clear, this is a grandfather that I loved and adored. I don't want to say I loved him more than my dad, but he was like my dad. Like, I felt like this man loved me so much that there's no other love that could have loved me more. And I want to say that because I think so many women, you know, in a sense, feel like it's their fault, or what did I do wrong, or, you know, I hate this person, or I didn't like him, or like, this wasn't a situation where my grandfather was mean or forced me to do anything. When I want to say force, I was 2 years old, but that was his way of loving me, and I didn't know it was wrong, clearly, at 2. This is so weird, and it's so cool to talk about it with you guys, too, because for so many years I thought about it and reflected and thought, why didn't I tell my mom, you know, that's not the way my parents loved me. That's not the way my siblings loved me. No one else loved me this way. Even his wife, my grandma, whether she knew about it, I don't know, but she didn't inappropriately love me. So I think I was so close to him. I loved him so much. And because I was 2, it's like, you know, that's just what he did. But I do remember he used to tell me, this is our secret, you know, and he knew how close I was to my mom. And he would just tell me, this is our secret. We can't ever tell anyone. And I just, it's crazy, but the truth is, I just trusted him. And I didn't tell anyone. Even to this day, I'm so close to my mom, and I always was, but I never even thought to tell her. Did I think it was wrong? No. At the time, I probably enjoyed it, but I don't know if I enjoyed it. He never penetrated me, so we didn't have sexual intercourse, but he did oral sex on me all the time, and I can vividly remember it. I don't know that I gave him oral sex, but he always made me hold his penis and talk to him. I remember he's the person that told me the word fuck and said, you know, I want you to say this word. And like, it grosses me out now to think about it, but it's kind of fascinating in a crazy way that a child that young is learning a word. Just let's take the word fuck, and I never used it around my parents. Like, I never repeated it. So it was like, I knew it was wrong, but I never told a soul. There's so many pieces to the story that fascinate me that helped me through my healing, because I never thought I was a bad person. I never thought it was wrong. But once I started realizing what had happened to me, which was not till way later in life, when I was like 17, 18, 19 years old, and in an abusive relationship with my son's dad, that's when I started really picking it apart and thinking, what the hell? Why didn't I tell anyone? Trying to deal with it and going to counseling about it.
Had you forgotten about it, or was it just something that you just didn't really even think about?
I don't think I thought about it. Like, I don't know. When my grandpa died, so it stopped when I was about 7. My grandfather got cancer. And I'll never forget, it's like, this is a man that I couldn't wait to see. I couldn't wait to sleep next to him. I couldn't wait to be hugged by him. We would sing together. We'd go for ice cream. There was never a feeling of, I don't want to see him, or what he's doing scares me or bothers me or anything. It was just so weird. And another weird thing that just came to mind, which is really freaky. I remember my twin sister was at their house once, and I remember we were old enough to use the bathroom and wipe ourselves, like just from peeing or pooping or whatever. He walked into the bathroom and told my twin sister that he needed to wipe her. And I just thought, how weird. But like, I didn't say anything about it. Now, in hindsight, my older sister and my twin sister, we all ended up talking about it when I was like in my 20s, and they both said that they told him no. Like, they just, I guess, knew better, or they just pushed him away or whatever. So that, if anything bothered me about myself, that made me question myself along the way, you know, going back and thinking, it's why did they stop him and think it was wrong, or that it just didn't feel comfortable, but I didn't. You know, I always thought, he loves me. This is how he loves me, and it's a beautiful thing. But when I was 7, he got cancer, and I'll never forget, we would go every Thanksgiving, and I remember this particular Thanksgiving we went, and my parents said, Papa has cancer, you know, he's sick, he has cancer, he might not look the same. And my grandpa was this short, chunky, portly dude, and we got there, and he was like skin and bones. And I'll never forget, like, that's like my last memory of him alive. He was sitting on the couch, and he just looked emaciated. And I'll never forget, it hurt my feelings so bad that I looked at him and kissed him and hugged him, and then I went in his bedroom and cried And it's like no one asked me, like, you know, are you okay? Why are you crying like this? I mean, I was literally sobbing at the sight of him not looking like who he is. And then he, like, I mean, I never was touched by him again at that point. He was sick. I don't even think I slept there that time. And if I did, it wasn't with him. And the next time we went into Cleveland was because he died. So he died pretty quickly after that. And it was literally the most devastating moment in my life that he died. I remember driving there and my parents were like, he might not remember you. He's forgetting people. And I was like, he's not going to forget me. And it was just all this weird emotion. But again, even thinking back to those moments, I was never thinking he did something wrong to me. He violated me. And then fast forward to when I was 18. I was, I think, 17 when I met my son's dad. And he was very verbally abusive at first and emotionally. And then it became physical. That abuse is what triggered every freaking memory. It was like I suddenly started literally having flashbacks of being inappropriately touched. And my son's dad did not sexually abuse me at all. But he did, at one point when I was pregnant with my son, I lived here actually in Arizona, and his friend came to visit, and he forced me to have sex with his friend and give his friend oral sex. I had already had the memories of all this other stuff. So other than that, which is sexual abuse, there was never a sexual abuse thing with him. It was very verbal, possessive, horrible abuse, and then physical abuse. And he would like punish me. He would stick me in corners, and he would tell me I'm stupid and ugly and I'm a cunt and I'm a whore. And I mean, I'm this young, like 19-year-old, and I'm thinking, what the fuck? The interesting thing about this whole experience is that I think some women or men that get abused, whether it's sexual or anything, I think they start to question themselves. Like, what's wrong with me? Why are you choosing me? Or what am I not doing right? And I never felt that way. I also never felt, even being abused by my son's dad, I never felt like this is my life and I'm dirty or I'm used goods or I'm damaged. I never thought bad of myself. And I really attest all of my experience is that I had a really strong will to live that was stronger than anything else. And I always felt in my mind that this is not my life. This is something happening right now, but this is not who I am. Because I just always had this hope. It was like the weirdest hope that I would just hang on to all the time. I actually did an Akashic reading, which was the most fucking awesome thing in the world. I've done it a few times. And I remember when I had my first Akashic reading, and Bernadette, the lady that did it, said, like, she brought up my grandfather. She knew that there was abuse and stuff. And we were talking about it. She told me, she had me talk to this other guy that did like color therapy to like go through almost being like hypnotized back into the time and place of certain instances of abuse and then changing your circumstances. Like changing the end result was the most fascinating thing. In those sessions, at one point the guy asked me, what do you see, like when your grandpa's doing this stuff to you, what do you see? Look around and tell me what you see. And I said, I see myself laying on the bed. And he's like, so where are you? Do you see yourself from the side? I said, no, it's like I'm floating above myself and looking down. And he said it was fascinating because he has so many women that have been abused that went through the color therapy, and usually they're in their own body and they're seeing the person's hands, or the person's face, that's their abuser. I saw myself. I was floating, but so my soul left my body to come to protect me, basically. Yeah. I wasn't meant to go like 10 feet under from these experiences. I always had a will to live. Something I was blessed with. I don't know. I never felt like, oh my God, like I'm a horrible person and these people are abusing me. I really didn't. Even when my son's dad was so abusive, and that was such a different abuse because clearly I knew it was wrong. You know, I'm a teenager. I've always been treated with TLC from my family, and this man was so mean that I literally feared for my life, like every day. The darkest time was after my son was born. So we lived in Chicago. I was pregnant. Long story short, my son's dad got in a huge fight with his brother, and he's like, we're leaving. And he picked me up. I don't know if I was at his apartment at the time or whatever, and I had no clothes, like just what was on my back and my purse. And he's like, we're leaving. You can call your parents in a couple days. I'm like, what? I mean, I'm 7.5 months pregnant. What are you talking about? So he took me against my will, and we just got on the road and started driving. And longer story short, we ended up here in Arizona. I was allowed to call my parents when we were in Colorado. It was horrifying. Again, the weird thing is, like, I was so scared, but not enough to try to find a way to tell my parents. It was just a weird thing. And I think part of it was because my ex-husband's threat to me was always, you know, he would threaten to kill me, but more he would threaten because he knew how close I was to my mom and dad. If you tell your mom and dad and it comes down to police coming to me, I'm going to kill you before the police get to you. He's basically said, if you tell your mom and dad and your mom and dad come to me, I'm going to kill your mom and dad. Like, so I was too scared to really say anything to my mom and dad because I didn't want them to get hurt. So I would rather just not tell anyone, which is what a lot of women do. We try to just take it or deal with it or feel like we can eventually get out. And if I'm thinking back even about it now, I always just felt like this isn't my life. I'm going to get out at some point. I don't know how else I can explain that to you guys, but I always knew I'd get out at some point. Now, there were a few times where like he would threaten to kill me and I would be like, holy fuck, he could kill me. But I think my fear was more of him physically beating on me or hurting me, and really even the emotional abuse, just like sticking me in a corner. I mean, I'm 19, you know, I'm a new mom, and I'm facing a corner and I'm crying, just tears, and I'm being told, fuck you, you're a whore, shut up, stop crying. Like, he would yell in my face to stop crying. And honestly, I think any woman or man that's been abused, either physically or emotionally or both, can attest to the fact that sometimes, this sounds horrible, I would have rather him slap me across the face or something. The abuse of the mental, like, torture of the things he would say to me were horrific, sad, hurtful, painful. So my son was born November 21st of 88. We lived here. And then my ex-husband just kind of went off the deep end, and it got very physical, and he was getting into major drugs. He was looking for heroin, cocaine, he was smoking weed. He would steal it or get it or whatever. But when he would run out and he would like go through like some withdrawals and he would come down off the high, he was so mean and vicious. It was just a horrible way to live. He started getting angry when my son would cry. So my son was a newborn, and if my son was like in his little car seat or, you know, wherever we had him in his little seat at home, and he would cry, my ex-husband would be just like, not shaken, but, you know, shut the fuck up, shut this fucking kid up. Like, he couldn't handle listening. And that's when the mom instinct kicked in. And I'm like, I need to get the fuck up out of here. I don't know how I'm going to get out of here, because he wouldn't leave me alone. And so the darkest time was between my parents came out here to see the baby when I think like December over New Year's, Christmas, New Year's. And then I went back to Chicago in January. How crazy did I go home? He let me go home to visit my family and let them meet my baby in January. And I didn't say anything, and I came back.
Wow.
Like, what the fuck was I thinking? Again, I feel like it's important to say, when we're under the influence of abuse and we're so literally fear-stricken, people that aren't ever abused don't understand.
Right.
You can't just leave. Some people can, and they take the risk. But for me, it was about, is he going to hurt my family? Is he going to kill my dad? Is he going to beat the shit out of my sister? Like, all that was too much for me, so I just kept taking it. It was just I mean, even thinking about it, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but I understand when I listen to people that were abused, why they can't leave, like why they're scared. And so when I went back at the end of January, we had moved from an apartment to a house. He started saying, I know you're going to leave me. It was like he had an instinct that I was thinking of leaving, because I really was. I had looked up in the yellow pages, shelters for battered women, but I made sure to not leave any little notes around. I just like knew what I needed. And I think I might have had like one little note in my wallet or something with an address and a phone number, because I knew if I ever got a chance to get away, I needed that number. But he never let me out of his sight. And then on February 27th of 1989, he said, I'm going to get a haircut. Okay, let me get the baby together. Let me get my things. And he goes, no, it's okay. You can just stay here. Don't fucking pull anything. And right then, I'll never forget, it was like yesterday, I knew I was getting away that day. I knew that I was going to leave. I didn't know how it was all going to turn out, but I knew that I was going to get away. And so we were living in Gilbert, and I didn't know anyone. We had just moved into this rental house. He left. Now, I didn't have anything pre-packed because, you know, he snooped around, and he would have known, because he was always on, like, are you going to leave me? Are you going to leave me? So I kind of reverse psychology'd his ass. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I love you and I want to work it out. And because I was being over nice. I just didn't want to give him any reason to think I was going to leave. And that's why he left me alone that day, which thank God. Wow. And so when he left, I watched him go down till I couldn't see him at the end of the street. And I like adrenaline rush times a million. But I know I was scared. I grabbed a diaper bag and a couple bottles, and I grabbed my son, and I had the clothes on my back, grabbed a few diapers, threw them in a bag. And then I went, so our house was like on a little, not a cul-de-sac, but kind of like a curve. And so the street that he has to come in and out was like straight in front. So when I walked out the door, I looked to the right and I went around the corner to the first house. So if he did come back, he wouldn't see me there. I just rang the bell of a random house and I said, my husband's abusing me and I need to call someone to pick me up. Can I use your phone? And it was this pregnant lady. She let me in. And ironically, she said that in the past month, one other girl came to her door and said that she was being abused. So it was so weird. And I drove by that house. In fact, I just took my sister there yesterday because I just wanted her to see. And I actually tried Googling to see who. I wish I could go back and thank that woman that she saved my life. She would have to remember I came to her door 30 years ago. So she let me in. Now, this is the craziest part. There were no cell phones back then. I had the number of the shelter. I only knew one person in Arizona that I didn't even personally know. It was my twin sister's former college roommate from ASU. And I knew that she lived in Tempe, and I was in Gilbert at the time. I knew her name was Heather. She'd never met me, never talked to me, nothing. I had her phone number. And I just took a chance, and I called this girl, and she fucking answered the phone. And I'm like, this is Jill's sister, Nancy. I don't know if you can help me, but I'm at a neighbor's house, and I need you to please pick me up and take me to a shelter for battered women. I just ran away. And she did not even hesitate. And she came and picked me up, and I'll never forget, the fear of God was in me so much that my ex-husband would drive back down the street, even though he'd never know her car or know her. I actually took my newborn son and I laid on the floor in the back of the car because I didn't even want to sit in the seat. And at that time, they didn't let you, like you had to drive to like 3 different places. They would never give you the address to the shelter to just go because in case you get followed. I had to go to one place at a payphone that they told me, and I had to dial a different number. Then they gave me an address to go to after that to another payphone. And it was like 3 of those times.
Wow, I did not know that.
They don't give you the directions because people can get followed.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about how the house looked except for the room. There was like a main room when you walk in that everyone was kind of sitting in, and then there was the bedroom that I was in overnight that night. I remember walking in, and this is something I really want to stress to people that have gone through any kind of abuse, because there's so many kinds of abuse at all levels, but abuse is abuse. So if someone's just being an asshole to you, it's abuse. I mean, if someone's disrespecting you and calling you names and just treating you shitty, it's abuse. And I remember when I went in there and saw these women that looked like the shit had been beat out of them. The woman who was assigned to me, my roommate, was this woman with 2 little kids that were like 2 and 3 years old, and her whole body was burned, like she had scars. I asked her what happened, and she said that her husband was sexually abusing the 2 little babies. Now, mind you, I was abused at their age sexually, and so that was like triggered. And she said that she was threatening to leave, so one night when she was asleep, he lit her on fire. And he thought that the house would burn down, but he left the kids. Thank God he left the kids. She woke up from being lit on fire, and she took the kids and she got out. And she lived, but her whole body, I'll never forget. I wish, again, that's another woman, like, in hindsight, you think, God, I want to go back and just say, I'm saved. Like, I made something of myself and see how she is, you know? But I don't remember her name. I don't remember what she looked like. I just remember these little sweet kids and her whole body being completely, like, burnt. Wow. And so my point to saying that is I felt like in that one moment, and it's the only moment I felt this way, I shouldn't be here. These women are totally being abused. I'm not being abused. Yeah. And I think that's a common thread with people. Yes, you are fucking being abused. Yeah. So abuse is abuse, and any form or level of abuse is not acceptable.
Right. Don't downplay it. Just
fucking downplay it.
Doesn't matter if you hear some traumatic stories. If you feel like how someone's treating you is not right, like that's not. It's your gut instinct, period.
And it's not acceptable. I mean, I could write a book about all the details, but basically what happened was Heather took me to the shelter. And she dropped me off, and that was in Phoenix somewhere. And the long story short, my mom was a school teacher at the time. And so when my son's dad got home that day and realized we were gone, the first person he called was my mom and dad. Like, where the fuck is my wife? And where's my son? And they didn't tell them anything, obviously, but they didn't know exactly where I was. They knew I was going to a shelter, but they didn't know, and they wouldn't have said anything anyway. The ironic part was, at the time, my son's dad was, he had learned how to fly. He was taking flying lessons, and his dad bought him a Cessna plane. So he had his own airplane, and he first what he did was he went to the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport thinking I was going to be on a flight to Chicago. And at the time, you could go to the gates. So he looked up all the flights to Chicago, had about 5 of his friends go with him, and they all went to all the gates. So luckily, by the grace of God, he told his dad, I'm going to fucking kill her. I'm going to find her, and I'm going to kill her, and I'm going to the airport, and I've got John and Joey and Tom and Jack going with me, and we're going to fucking kill her and get my baby back. So luckily, his dad called my parents and said, whatever you do, do not send her to Phoenix Sky Harbor.
Wow.
And thank God, because that's where I was going to go, to fly home to Chicago. So I stayed overnight, ended up staying overnight. He got in his fucking airplane. He had a pilot license, I think, by then, but he wasn't instrument rated. Now, from Arizona to Chicago, you have to be instrument rated. You can't fly in the clouds if you're not instrument rated. This motherfucker flew in his airplane all the way to Chicago to try to find me and harass my family and my parents. And obviously didn't find me, but he threatened my mom. My mom was a school teacher, so he called and said, I'm coming up there, and I'm going to basically beat your ass if you don't tell me where my daughter and my wife are. My wife and my son are. And so my mom, being a school teacher, I don't know if you guys remember the Lori Dan story from years ago, but she went into a school and started threatening. So this is a big deal. So now the FBI got involved.
Oh, good.
My mom was police escorted to school. The FBI told my parents, you can't send her to Chicago. Don't send them home right now. And again, thanks to the participation of my ex-father-in-law, who said, don't fucking send them home.
Right.
So we had to find somewhere to send me. Heather came back the next day and drove me 2 hours to Tucson Airport, and I flew out to my dad's brothers, my aunt and uncles in California, in Riverside. My son's dad knew of these relatives, and they were the closest relatives to where we lived in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Literally, I was there one day, and he had already hired a private investigator, and they found me. Tony, my son's dad, ended up calling my aunt's house, and my cousin, who at the time was young, I don't even know how, he was probably 16 or 15, answered the phone, and he didn't know any better. He's like, Nancy, someone's on the phone for you. And I get on, and it's my ex-husband, and I'm like,
woman, this is like
it's a movie. I know I'm probably going all over the place, but it's like deep shit. Like, there's so many details.
I am like sweating. Me too.
I know, I am too. Shit. Sweaty pits. Like, no, but like, I could really go on and on. There's just so many details, but I want to say some of this because I want people to know you can get out. So they found me, and so I had to be moved to a different cousin's house that he didn't know existed. That was my aunt's cousin through marriage that he didn't know, and that was in Long Beach. And I stayed there for about 6 months until my ex-husband was actually ambushed and arrested here in Arizona, and then they extradited him to Chicago. And he was in prison for a while. He was in it's called MCC. It's a correctional center in Chicago.
For threatening your mom?
Yeah. It was like a huge, that was like considered, I don't even know if it was a felony. I don't even remember how that was, but they arrested him, and he was in jail for not just jail, but he was at the correctional center, I want to say for 3, 4, 5 months. So I didn't actually move back to Chicago until he was officially in that place. So I lived in California with my son for 3 months. Didn't see anyone in my family, just like my aunt and uncle. And that was really fucking hard.
Yeah.
And then I moved back to Chicago. It's the abuse went on. This didn't just end from there. It's such a long story, but I actually ended up taking my son when he was a little baby to the prison. I just always felt like, okay, I have a problem with his dad, but his dad loved him, and I knew he did, and I never felt like not allow him to see his son. I went with my ex-in-laws, and they drove to the prison, and I would go in there with my ex-mother-in-law and my son, and we would go visit him. Did I talk to him? Not really. Was I scared of him? Yeah, but we were done. I was scared of him, but I don't even know. Going back in time, I think to myself, why the fuck did I, if I had to do that shit over again, no, motherfucker, I'm not going to see you. And I probably would still have allowed my baby to go, but I would have had my ex-in-laws take him. But for whatever reason, I didn't want my son out of my sight. So we would go see him, and of course, Tony was apologetic, and I love you, and I'm so sorry, and I wish I never hurt you. I mean, he used to do that shit to me all the time. I mean, this is a man who, his main way of abuse to me, other than the whole stuff like sticking me in a corner and all that, he would throw things on me. Like, he smoked a ton of weed, and he had this orange bong that was like this tall, and he would have all the dirty bong water, and he would just come and pour it on me just to be a dick. I mean, he would just do stupid shit. But his main thing, as far as physical, he would fucking choke me till I stopped breathing and fucking faint. And then when I would wake up, I would be in his lap, and he would be crying, rubbing my hair, and I'm so sorry, and I love you, and I didn't mean to hurt you, and I'll never do it again.
He would choke you out.
He would choke me out. And what I learned to do, because I was so scared I would die, I would make myself pass out faster. I don't know how I did it, but I was so scared, like literally the fear of fucking God. There were times that I thought, am I going to die today? But it's weird when I think about it now, because even though I thought that, something in me knew, you're going to be okay. This is not your life. That's just the common thread I kept going back to. This is not your life, and you're going to be okay. And I just had this fucking will to live. But there were so many moments in my experience with my son's dad that literally were, I was so scared I would ball up, I would curl up in a ball and just want to hide, and I didn't know what to do with myself. It was like living, looking over your shoulder. Not, he came to my mom's house once and tried to bang the door down. And even though I knew he couldn't get in, I balled up in a ball in the bathroom and shut it and locked it and put a chair behind it, knowing he can't get in, but scared shitless. So just the fear is so overwhelming from abusers. And when a woman or man tells you they can't leave, they truly can't leave. They just can't leave. They're paralyzed in fear. So when I hear people say, why didn't you just fucking leave? Who takes that? Who deals with it? I'm not a fighter. I had no intention or desire to try and fight this man and beat him off. I didn't have a voice, and there's things like today that in hindsight, looking back, I realize that now I have a voice, and I've had like extreme opposite things happen in other relationships. Because all this abuse from my grandfather and my son's dad have literally absolutely affected every relationship I've ever had in horrible ways. Like, I'm not a mean person, but I'm angry. Like, I get, if I feel like I'm being attacked, even though maybe the man is not meaning to attack me, but I take certain words and certain tones of voice as though I'm about to be attacked. And if it's someone that communicates well, we're fine, because I'll communicate and I won't yell or scream or be angry. I'll just say, I feel like you're going off on me, or you're attacking me. Like, what are you doing? Like, we could talk about it. But for some people, they're like, they don't give a shit and they can't communicate, so it just goes nowhere. So my son's dad, long story short, he ended up dying. He was shot by the police in 95, September 1st of 95. I was already remarried to my daughter's dad, and I would say 3 to 4 months before he died, maybe 6 months before he died, he threatened to kidnap my son. And he said, I want him to live with me, and you've had him his whole life, and now it's my turn. And he was a total dick. He was living in Florida at the time with his girlfriend, and I was married and had a new baby. And he said, it's my turn now. I'm going to kidnap him. And he went through this whole thing of threatening me at my kitchen table with my husband there, saying, I'm just letting you know that you better look over your shoulder, because one day you're going to be walking around with him and someone's going to snatch him. It won't be me. And I'm taking him out of the country and you'll never see him again.
Wow.
I mean, it was like so fucking horribly horrible. And it was hard to do anything. I didn't want to leave my house. I had to go to work. I had to take him to school or daycare. My ex-husband, my daughter's dad, he liked my daughter's dad, ironically. And my daughter's dad's not confrontational, so he was like, Tony, don't talk like that. Let's just talk this out. He was always trying to be the solution person. And my son's dad, Tony, would just sit there and be like, and he wasn't mean about it. I mean, he wasn't like yelling or screaming. He just sat there. And he's just like, look, it's my turn to be with our son. You're never going to see him again. And I mean, it was the weirdest thing is how it all played out was then within like 4 or 5 months, he was shot and killed by the police. He was shot and killed because, ironically, so my son was going to a Catholic school at the time. He was 6.5. His dad wanted to come with me to pick him up and see his school. And at the time, we were getting along. And I'm like, well, just be at the school at such and such time. That's what time I pick him up. So if you're late, you're late. But I'll be there picking him up. And if you want to see the school, you can come meet his teacher and all that. That's where I'll be. Tony was just was not, he wasn't being abusive to me anymore, other than like he threatened to kidnap. That day, it was September 1st of 95. I had my neighbor over, and my daughter was with me, obviously, and my son. I really liked my son's dad's girlfriend at the time. She was really young. I knew she was being abused too, because she kind of told me a little, but I didn't get too deep into it because I didn't want to make their business mine and have more problems with my son's dad. But I just told her a few times, like, Natalie, I'm here for you if you ever need anything. I know where you are. Right. I've been there. And that's kind of how I left it with her. And so she never chose to say anything. And I got a phone call, and my son, I think, picked up the phone, to be honest. He was only like 6.5, but he picked up the phone, and he said, my son said, Natalie's crying. And then my son was like, did Dad do something stupid? It was weird. My son like had this sense of knowing his dad was fucking up and doing shit. My son had just gone to Great America like 3 days prior with his dad and his dad's best friend and Natalie, and they were on the American Eagle roller coaster. And my son, out of the blue, just asked his dad, when are you going to die? And his dad's like, not for a long time. And he literally died like 3 days later. So that was an issue with my son, obviously healing and going through that grief. I got on the phone. It was Natalie, and she's crying. She's like, Tony's been shot. And I started laughing because I'm like, good. I was kind of like, what the fuck happened? Yeah. And she's like, well, we went to his dad's company, and he was trying to get money from his dad, which he always did. He wanted to get money because he was supposed to come to my son's school and see the school, but he was going to give me money for his school because he wanted to always act like he contributed to the Catholic school, but really his dad was paying for it, my son's grandpa. And I knew that, but he wanted to make it look like he was paying. So he had gone to pick up money from his dad at his dad's work, and his dad wouldn't give it to him. And so he was harassing his dad, and his dad's like, you need to leave. Well, I guess he had a warrant out for his arrest at the time, so he didn't want to get arrested because he wanted to get back to Florida. So his dad's like, if you don't leave, I'm going to call the police. So the grandfather called the police to his place of business. This was all in the newspaper and everything. And it was like a huge, like a massive thing. 'Cause his dad had a huge, or his grandfather had a huge printing company in Elk Grove Village in Chicago. The police came, and my son's dad took off running through the business. And they're like, why is this man running? But he didn't know that they didn't know he had a warrant out. Like, they didn't know it was Anthony Campisi, they didn't know that. So he went in, I guess he ran into like a dark room. It was a printing company. He ran into a dark room, and then the cop was out, and he slammed the door, and the cop was outside the door. He grabbed my son's dad grabbed a fire extinguisher and then threw the door open, and the cop said he thought it was a weapon, and he shot him. My son's dad died that day. And it was brutal. It's just, again, going through like all the experiences and fear and emotions and love and hate and all the stuff. It was the biggest relief of my life that this man died. But it was also extremely sad. Weirdly, his dad and I were getting along in a sense. Other than the threat of kidnapping, we talked. He would call me if he was sad. And I remember like months leading up to his death, he would call me and just want to talk at night. He had a couple different girlfriends, and he was like telling me that he was scared to die. Just weird things. Like, he was just going through weird stuff. So for me, just because I have a huge heart, even though I couldn't stand this man, and he was like, I was so scared of him. When he died, I felt sad for him. It was like, I was happy, I was relieved, and I felt bad for my son, but I literally, all I could think about was, I hope he didn't suffer. So again, when we're being abused, and depending if you're like me, I happen to have a big heart and I genuinely care about people. My concern wasn't even so much for my pain or what I was going through or my relief. It was, I hope he didn't suffer. And this is someone that literally, I suffer daily from this man. It's so much. And I know I'm saying all this to say, the bottom line was, number one, I got out on February 27th, 1989, when I was, 20 years old. I escaped from my abuser, and I never fucking looked back. And if I think about what saved my life or gave me the strength, in addition to like my will to live, I used to write poems, and I hid them in my closet in a journal. And all the poems were vivid descriptions of the abuse. And by the grace of God, he never found them. But I never said in any poem that I was going to escape or anything. But I'm sure it would have set him off if he would have found them. But it was like the way that I told the universe what was happening to me, how I felt about it, and that I deserve a better life. And to some people that might sound corny, but it was literally what saved my life. It was what gave me hope and strength and belief that there was something better for me and my son. I never looked back. But what I've had to deal with from all the abuse as a child, the sexual abuse, and then the abuse from my son's dad, was that every relationship, starting when I lost my virginity at 15 when I was a freshman in high school, from that relationship, every single relationship I've ever had, to me, sex and love were so skewed. I didn't know. I felt like if someone loved me, they're going to want to have sex with me. Like, they have to have sex with me if they love me. And so I never knew the difference. You know, for me, I was literally raised by my grandfather thinking if someone loves you and truly loves you, they're going to touch you, they're going to lick you, they're going to kiss you, they're going to smell you. You don't know any better. You know, right. That's when your mind is like, you're two. I mean, you don't know any better. And it's just kind of interesting what happens. And through counseling and healing and this Reiki that I did and my Akashic readings, I've really come to realize that I had to go back and forgive myself, and I had to go back and heal my young Nancy. I had to tell her it's okay. I had to tell her it wasn't her fault. I still to this day talk to her, because you have to close those loops. It's like I say to anyone going through anything, even a job loss, a divorce, whatever, you can't go around it. You can't go around the feelings of heartbreak. If a man breaks up with you, or if your daughter, if a boy breaks up, you know, they can't just go around it. You have to go through it. You're not truly living life if you don't go through these experiences and deal with every fucking emotion that you have. And so for me, dealing with all those emotions and writing poetry about every feeling that I had, and just talking to myself, talking to people, talking to a counselor, it was like healing. I didn't tell my parents that I was abused by my grandfather until I was divorcing my daughter's dad in 1996. Yeah. And the reason I told them was because, like, my daughter's dad is the most amazing human being on the planet, but he's 12 years older than me. We had nothing in common, and I felt like I married him because he was protective of me and loved my son, and I know he'd never hurt me. But I wasn't passionately in love with him. I wasn't physically attracted to him that way, and I knew that's something I wanted and deserved in a relationship. And when I told my parents that I was going to divorce him after my son's dad died, it was like when my son's dad died, I felt like I wanted to be free. I was free. In fact, when my parents, I went to the hospital when I found out he died, and he had died before, he was already dead before I got there. My son's grandfather was walking out to meet me, and he just looked at me and he said, "He's gone." And I cried a little, but I didn't let loose, but I cried. And then it was just a weird feeling of all kinds of stuff. But then when my parents got there and I knew they were there and I went outside to meet them outside their emergency room, as soon as I saw my parents' faces, I just broke down and started yelling out. It was like there was an animal in me yelling out, "I'm free, I'm free, I'm free." I was sobbing. Wow. I'm free. I was almost like dropping to my knees. And I just kept saying, "I'm free, I'm free." I can't even tell you how many fucking times I probably said it. And it was just like such a release of fucking pain and fear and anger. The relationships that I had with men over the years have been heart-wrenching because I'm 49. I've been married 3 times and divorced 3 times. I married my son's abusive dad because I was 18 when I got pregnant, and both of our parents said we're not having an illegitimate child in the family. We should have never gotten married. So any mothers or fathers out there, if your kids get pregnant at 16, 17, 18, or whatever, don't force them to get married. That's not the fucking answer. Yeah. I mean, it isn't. And we had no business getting married. You know, we got married in Reno, Nevada, left him months later. And then I married my daughter's dad. So I wasn't even 21, and he was 32 at the time. Great man, greatest man on the planet to this day. Like, he's just a human being that no one will ever compare to. And I love him with all my heart, and he's a great dad. But I was not in love with him, and I was 20. You know, I was young. I was out of an abusive relationship, and I'm sure you both can attest that however you were at 20, you totally changed by the time you were 25. Mm-hmm. Then you totally changed by the time you turned 30. Then you're totally different by the time you're 35.
You were a little girl.
I was a little girl in a little girl's scared, fearful body and mind, and I needed to be set free when my son's dad died, and I just didn't want to be married to that man. I didn't feel like that was what my life was supposed to be.
How old were you then?
So when I divorced my daughter's dad, my daughter was almost 1, so I was 26. So she never remembers us being married, which is kind of sad. But I'm one of those people, like, I don't live with any regrets. I feel like everything and every decision that I made was made at the time when I needed to make it. And I was doing the best I could with whatever fucked up situation I had. And I can't go back and change it. And it is what it is. And I learned from them, you know, from those things. Every relationship I've had has been a pattern, not necessarily of abusive men. Thank God, knock on wood, no man was ever physically abusive to me after my son's dad. Definitely emotional abuse has been a pattern. And to me, emotional abuse, in my opinion, includes cheating. Being cheated on is a fucking abuse. So being lied to, that's abuse. I know better now. I know what I deserve. I know that I'm worthy. I know that I'm beautiful. I know that I'm not a victim. I know that I'm not damaged goods.
How'd you get there?
I don't know. It's funny because I was reading the questions you guys kind of sent me to think about before this, and I thought to myself, I never had bad beliefs about myself or thought, why me? Or, you know, I have thought, like, God, am I going to ever find someone that just truly loves me for me? But I think people have loved me for me, but I've picked people or attracted in energy from people that weren't available and capable of the love and the level of love and maturity that I'm deserving of and that I'm kind of at. I think other than my daughter's dad, every man, now that I'm thinking back, everyone except my daughter's dad and maybe my guy I lost my virginity to have been either sexually or physically abused. Men. So it's like we have these patterns, and there has to come a time where you kind of like break the cycle and break the pattern. How do you do that? I'm still figuring that out. You know, it's not easy, but I think that what you guys are doing with this platform and just being able to talk about it, talking openly about life stuff, not having to feel like you're going to get judged. And then even more importantly, finding someone that either has something in common. It's like a fucking ton of bricks is lifted off of you. Being able to just speak and have a voice and cry and get goosebumps and feel like someone fucking understands. You know, I'm not alone. Part of the healing for me has been meeting people like you, where you've had things similar to what I've gone through, and listening to how you thought about it, your perception, and how you got through your stuff. I mean, people don't realize the power of the energy and the words and the talking and just having someone's support or someone's energy or just someone that understands. It's very healing, and it gives you hope no matter what. And I mean, for me, unfortunately, I mean, my mom and dad didn't know I was being abused. My sisters and I, we never talked about it until I told my parents eventually that I was being abused. And I don't think I ever finished that story, but when I told them was when I was going to divorce my daughter's dad, my mom said to me, why would you divorce him? He's the best thing that ever happened to you. You're never going to find a good man like that. What's wrong with you? And hearing someone say and my mom, who I fucking love and adore and is my best friend, it rings in my ears. How does my mom say, what's wrong with you? And I didn't even question myself, like, what is wrong with me? But I was offended and fucking hurt. And I was like, nothing's fucking wrong with me. And at that point I felt like, and I was going to counseling at the time, and I was like, you know, I'll tell you what's wrong with me. I fucking had a fucked up life since I was 2, and I don't know the difference of love and sex and why they do one thing or another, you know, how I'm being treated. And even though I knew better at this point, it already happened. It's all I ever knew. I decided to tell my parents, but I couldn't tell them to their face. It was like really horrifying and embarrassing. I did, if anything that I felt, it was embarrassment. Not so much shame, because I knew it wasn't my fault, but embarrassment in a weird way. Like I didn't want my dad to cry and be hurt that his dad did that. Because again, as a mom, I'm thinking, if anyone fucking told me that a motherfucker, that my dad or my mom touched my kids, the shit's over. I'll be on the Channel 5 News. I didn't want to hurt my dad. I'm someone that's always thinking about everyone else's feelings, you know? So I wrote them a letter. And when I wrote them a letter, I made 3 copies of it, and I mailed one to them, and I mailed one to each of my 2 sisters and one to my brother. But I decided to call my sisters and say, I wrote a letter to mom and dad, and I mailed you each a copy, because I just wanted them to know ahead of time. And my older sister goes, is it about Papa? Isn't that fucked up?
Wow.
And we all just sat there crying and talking about it. And that's how I knew that they were abused too. It's the first time. And I was 26 years old.
And how old were they?
My twin sisters, 26, and my older sister was 28. The weird thing is, like, our lives we're all so close in age, and we each, as the girls in the family, because I have a brother too, And we don't know if he was abused. We didn't come out and ask him. And when he found out, he was so devastated, but he wouldn't talk about it.
Right.
And so we don't know if my grandpa abused him, and we don't want to ask. Like, we figured if he wanted to talk about it. But at the time when we brought it all out, my brother had just had his first son, and they had named his middle name Jack, which was my grandpa's name, and they changed his name. So my older sister never had sex with anyone in her life except for her husband, who she's been married to for 30 years now. And she never really dated. She was like she's very smart. She was in choir and stuff. She was more like nerdy. She had all her friends. She would go out on dates sometimes, but I don't even know if she kissed anyone. Like, she did not do shit. She met her husband in college. He was older, and that was who she lost her virginity to, and that's who she married. Then my twin sister was, love ya, but she was a slut. I wanted like the love and the intimacy and the affection. So my point is, like, we're three totally different sexual types of people.
Having
You know
the
what I
same
mean?
exact thing happen.
Having the same exact thing happen, but in different levels. And see, and the weird thing too, my older sister, I can talk about the stuff, and we have over the years a lot about what happened with my grandpa. My twin sister never wants to talk about it. Now we can, it's just weird.
I love this, because this is such a different approach to being sexually abused.
Yeah.
Mostly the typical story is anger towards your abuser. And I love that you've never really had that.
I've never been angry at
And
him.
so other women who have experienced your experience can go, okay, there's nothing wrong with me for feeling this way. That, like, you almost feel like you should be angry at him.
Yeah, and when I've written him letters, like, because I've had 2 counselors, and with the Reiki that I did, she's like, write him a letter. And in my letters, anger came out.
Okay.
My
So
voice
some
of
came
anger. Like, how fucking dare you? And when I read it to myself, I bawled. Like, thinking about it, I want to bawl. Because I have anger in me. I mean, he violated me. He fucked up every relationship I ever had. Like, honest to God, it fucked everything up. But I'm one of those, like, glass half full people, and in all honesty, I feel like I would not be exactly who I am today, which in my opinion is someone extremely blessed and gifted and special that has so much love to give, that if those things didn't happen to me, I couldn't be this person that somehow needs to share all this stuff with people that are hurting. It's like, yeah, my sister could get really angry. My other sister was kind of neutral. I wanted to just stand there and cry at the thought of him being gone. But I've had my moments of, like, you motherfucker, you fucking you stole my innocence, literally. But, and then I get over it, and then I just burn the letter or whatever, and I move on, because I've forgiven him truly in my heart, but I didn't forgive him to set him free. I forgave him to set me free.
Right.
One of the hardest parts of this healing was going back to my young Nancy and forgiving her, and just not even forgiving her. I mean, because there was nothing to forgive. She didn't do anything wrong, but for showing her that I'm so sorry I didn't protect you, or, just all kinds of different things that I have said to her and still do, to let her know we're okay. Because honestly, I truly feel that for my whole life up until very recently, really since I've moved here, I've never dealt with my young Nancy and set her free, told her it's okay. And I'll never forget, the day after I kind of did the major part of that, I woke up the next morning and I took a shower and just stood in the shower and fucking sobbed my face off, because I felt so free.
So you would say your biggest healing experience was actually tapping into your inner child.
Yeah. If it's someone that was abused as a child, whether it's sexual or physical, they need to go back and talk to that child. And there's a few ways. Write your young self a letter and say everything that you feel and apologize to them. It's energy. It's the energy of my young self that I needed to tell her, I'm sorry, and you didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry that I didn't protect you the way I needed to, and we're safe now, and nothing will ever hurt us, and we can be one and be whole again, and we're 49 now. I mean, it sounds kind of corny, but it's not corny.
No,
like, this is some serious shit. So writing a letter to me, and I've done it a couple times, is very powerful, but I'm also not afraid of talking out loud and talking to myself, or, I'll be honest, in 2 places, in the shower and in the car, I do a lot of talking out loud. And I do a lot of crying in both places. Like, it's my place where I don't have to answer the phone. No one's going to come in and walk in on me. I'm just in my space and in my head. And I do a lot of healing that way. And something about the shower, even after I did this Reiki recently, when I took my Epsom bath after my Reiki session, and I love taking baths, but I've never physically pushed water down the drain. and I don't know what made me do it, but as I was finishing my bath and I pulled the plug, normally I'll get out and then pull the plug and let the water out.
It's instinctual.
I sat in this tub and I literally pulled the plug out and sat in there, and I cried and I pushed the water out of the tub. And it wasn't just the abuse of my grandfather or the abuse from my son. It was so much fucking stuff from relationships and people that I allowed in my space and my life and my energy for just longer than they deserved to be there. I removed it. I dismissed it. I wanted it out of the universe, out of the dimensions and planes around me. I mean, gone. Like, get the fuck out of here. And it was instinctive, you know, it was just kind of powerful.
I love that metaphor that you did that.
Yeah, but the young, for someone being abused as a young person, whether it's physical or sexual, you should never feel shame or embarrassment. And you should go back and heal your inner young self. You have to.
There's meditations that you can find on YouTube with that, which
that's pretty
I've
powerful.
used some of those, and it's amazing to go in as the adult self and go into some of those very traumatic experiences, which are it's challenging.
Yeah, it is.
To go back, because like everything in you doesn't ever want to experience that ever again.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of courage to go into that meditation where you put yourself purposely back into that traumatic experience. But when you do that, you're able to be there as the adult and be able to come in and nurture and heal and comfort
100%.
that little Nancy, and be able to let her know, like, I'm here to help you, and to be able to just put a whole different perspective on it all. And it's amazing, the healing experience
it
that
really
can
truly
bring.
is. And you know, it's interesting, when I moved here, there's so much about Arizona that's just so healing for me.
Arizona's amazing.
Yeah, it is. But you know, my son was born here 30 years ago, and that's when the abuse was really bad. That's when I left. I literally escaped from my abuser. If I think back to how did I get out, it was not a whim. He didn't just leave me alone one day and I'm like, oh, I think I'm going to leave today. It was a mindset constantly from every bit of abuse, telling myself, I love myself, I'm good enough, I'm a good mom, and this is not my fucking life. This is not who I am. This is not my life. I mean, I could sit there and say that over and over again, and it's truly mindset. If I had to give anyone advice, I would say, I know how you feel. I've been there. I've never been so scared in my life. Didn't know from one day to the next if he would choke me to death or slap me across the room or knock me out or whatever. But somehow in me all the time, the consistent thread was, this is not my life. This is not who the fuck I am. And this is some temporary place that for whatever reason I need to be here, I'm here. And you have to have a will to live. And I've met so many people in my life. I have certain family members that I feel like when they're under stress, they just are so depressed in their space that it's almost like they're talking about, well, God, these people are rich, or these people have this, or she doesn't have any cellulite. Or my point to saying all that is, you can't think that way. You can't think someone has better than you. You have to stay in your place and say, this isn't my life. We shouldn't compare ourselves to anyone else. You know, there's a lot of people out there getting abused, and it's sad. And some people actually think, this is my life. I'm going to just have to deal with it.
Yeah,
I never accepted it. I didn't have a voice. I never fought back. What would have happened if I would have fought back? I don't know. I didn't want to take that chance at the time. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of women that fight back physically and or scream back. I don't know how that works for them. That wasn't my story. I was meek and quiet and scared fucking shitless. But in my own head, in addition to like writing poetry, because that's what I did to heal, was this is not my fucking life. I just can't explain it any other way than saying it's all mindset. My advice would be, talk to your fucking self, write yourself notes, tell yourself you're beautiful. I love you, and I don't deserve this. You know, tell yourself you love yourself and you don't deserve it, and this is not how people get treated, and this is not your life. I feel like when you set intentions and what you put out, you get back. If you're constantly scared and saying, this motherfucker, and I hate him, and I wish he wouldn't hit me, at the end of the day, you're not helping yourself doing that. I mean, you literally have to put the energy towards what you need back.
What you want.
What you want. You have to claim your life back. I mean, it sounds easy in a sense. It sounds hard. I don't know. It is hard. It's fucking very hard, but it's not hard to talk and believe in yourself, because the more you tell yourself something, the more I believe you believe it. I have literally settled in every relationship I've had my whole life to present. And in my opinion, it's still something obviously I'm working on. So my point is, like, I'm not just some woman that, woo, I got out and I'm great and I'm free and I'm healed. But no, it's a constant process. You're going to constantly be healing and growing and learning. But that's what life is. It's, a whole bunch of lessons. When I finally have the opportunity or know in my mind that it's made up, then I don't look back and I'm able to move forward. But it's still a work in progress for me. I've been in so many unhealthy relationships that because I'm such an old romantic soul and I have so much love, I always want to hope for the best, and I'll exhaust every option before I leave someone that is in any way abusive or whatever, unhealthy. It's just how I am. So, like, I could sit here and tell you one day, this motherfucker, blah, 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 he's fucking, I'm leaving him, whatever. But, the reality of Nancy is when I turn around, but I love him. I'm not ready yet. And I think a lot of us women have that in us. Some are quick to leave and whatever, and great. That's them, But for the ones of us that really just hold out hope, it's just fascinating how people can go through different things, and make it out and be okay. And I think part of why my story is that I've stayed in situations and even kind of still do is because there's more for me to learn that I'm supposed to share. And for my own healing too. But I really believe that in talking about it and the platform you guys have with people and interviewing them, it's what's going to really save a lot of people.
I agree.
If I can give any advice, and I know it's easier said than done, but we can't blame every man because we were abused by one or two. And a lot of women, that's how they think they're getting through it. They're not getting through it by saying, men suck, and all men this and all men that. I haven't walked into these other relationships thinking, well, he's going to cheat on me, or he's going to abuse me, or he's going to lie to me. I don't. I give them the opportunity to be who they are and see what happens. But I don't blame anyone for anything that happened to me that had nothing to do with them. And that's a really important thing to think about, because there are a lot of very bitter, angry people walking around thinking all men suck, they all cheat, they're all abusive, whatever.
Right.
But that's just not true.
But at the same time, not accepting being treated in an unhealthy way.
And recognizing the red flags.
Right.
A really important part of my healing, when I left my daughter's dad, who was a wonderful man, there was a lot of pain and healing going on there as to why did I really leave him, and what about my past made me feel like this isn't a marriage I want. This isn't a marriage I need to be in. There's just a lot of pieces. And again, part of it is just maturing. From being 20 to now 49, I'm a mature person. I'm a mom. I'm a grandma. But I've also been through 5 more years, every 5 years of life that have taught me lessons.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
I'm in a trance. I'm speechless. You're amazing.
Thank you so much.
I feel like I was just reading like a crazy intense book.
Right? Or movie. I'm moving jaws on the ground.
Where's my popcorn?
What?
Wait, I don't really eat.
Then what happened? Wait, and then what happened? And what did she say? What did he say about that? Yes.
It's crazy. It is.
So we'll find out more.
Okay.
To be continued.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the Say My Name podcast. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook.